Gentlewoman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, and I want to thank our ranking member and my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, members, I rise today really with a very heavy heart, one that is filled with sorrow for the families and the loved ones who were killed and injured this week. Only the most foolish and the most callous would not understand the grief that has really gripped our people and millions across the world. This unspeakable act on the United States has really forced me, however, to rely on my moral compass, my conscience, and my God for direction. September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control. Now, I have agonized over this vote, but I came to grips with it today, and I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful yet very beautiful memorial service. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Thursday, July the 23rd, 2020. That was the voice of Congresswoman Barbara Lee. She represents parts of Oakland and the East Bay, much of Oakland and the East Bay in Northern California in the U.S. House of Representatives. That was Congresswoman Lee speaking on September the 14th, 2001. Just 3 days after the terror attacks in this country. Barbara Lee, a profile in courage, was the only member of Congress who voted against the war in Afghanistan. The only member of Congress. Everyone in the House except her voted to go to war in Afghanistan. Literally that week, literally just a few days, 2, 3, 4 days after the terror attacks of 9/11/2001 occurred here in the U.S. Barbara Lee took so much heat that day, and for weeks and months and years after that. And she is still in Congress today, running for yet another term this November. Everyone in the Senate voted to go to war in Afghanistan. Everybody. To the best of my recollection. Yes, every single person did indeed vote to go to war in Afghanistan. Barbara Lee stood alone. Courage, conviction, principle, integrity. And just paraphrasing what she said in that final moment of that speech from September 14th, 2001. And she herself was quoting someone. Let us not become the evil we are fighting against. Let us not become the evil that we deplore. I think we have become the evil that we deplore. And I dare say it didn't begin in 2001. I know it didn't. I think you know it didn't as well. On this episode of The Politicrat, a look at some context when we talk about what's happened in Portland, what's happening across this country now under Donald Trump, how we got here, and what we can do about it. Next.
They're acting like an uncontrolled mob on the street with uniforms and badges that they don't show. As you see right here, they beat this man up. Police don't do this. Watch this. What kind of bullshit is this? Wolf need to be run out of Washington. He has no business in charge of Homeland Security. We're talking about people like Chertoff and Tom Ridge. Those type of people of stature led Homeland Security. They have denigrated this to a lawless group who go around and think they can suppress demonstrators doing peaceful as well as disobedience type demonstrations. This is a shame.
That was Lieutenant General Russell Honore. You may remember General Honore from 2005 as he was the tactical commander during Hurricane Katrina and the response to it in Louisiana, down in New Orleans, the Lower Ninth Ward, and areas around there in the state of Louisiana, which you know that was hit hard by Hurricane Katrina. That was in 2005. That was General Honore speaking on Tuesday on the MSNBC program, The 11th Hour. Now, General Honore is correct that this is thuggish behavior. He was describing the scenes in Portland, Oregon, which have been going on over the last few weeks. In fact, many people in Portland would attest to, and as I have been told by several people who live in Portland, have told me that this has been going on, whether it's feds as thugs or regular police in Portland, have been doing this since the protests against the death of George Floyd began, the murder of George Floyd. Since that murder took place in May of this year on Memorial Day, there have been 56 days of consecutive protest in Portland, Oregon. In fact, there are other cities where protests continue, and I've been saying that for a number of days and weeks. The protests continue. The media just choose not to cover them. And the only reason that the media is covering them now is because you are seeing these jackbooted thug feds who are destroying any notion of a constitution or any notion of democracy. And that's a term that we've always had skepticism about. We meaning black people and brown people. Lots of skepticism about that word democracy. I would let you know, have you know, that democracy for us has never really existed in this country, and when it has, it's only been because we've had to fight for it, and in many cases, die for it. Russell Honoré talked about what was going on in Portland, and you heard him say, oh yeah, this is, what kind of bullshit is this? And yeah, that's a nice soundbite. It's entertaining. And yes, I mean, it evokes the righteous outrage that I think we all have, or at least a great many of us have. Apparently not the police, though. I mean, the police, you haven't heard any police officers really come out against this. Where are all the good police, quite frankly? Where are they? Condemning these actions. These are protesters who are minding their own business and speaking up for Black lives. And in fact, the media itself hasn't even really got back to that question, has it now? The whole reason why these protesters are in the street in the first place is because police murdered George Floyd. That is not even being talked about anymore. It's as if it almost didn't happen. At least that is the tone that some media are taking on this. You got cover-up Bill Barr, who I've talked about before on these episodes, talking about the reaction to the murder of George Floyd was extreme. No, the murder was extreme. The treatment of George Floyd was extreme. But quite frankly, in keeping with hundreds of years of American tradition of murdering, lynching Black and brown people. I mean, the Black people being murdered and lynched in this country is extreme, but is not unusual, and it is very commonplace. Only CNN, and it was through Don Lemon's show last night, even talked about George Floyd. Don Lemon, who I sometimes do disagree with. I mean, we all have disagreements with everybody. I mean, that's just par for the course. But Don Lemon had the brother of George Floyd on last night. He had the attorney Ben Crump on last night. Phineas Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, spoke up. And I thought that was good, but that was really the only corporate news media program that had George Floyd's brother on. And it has been almost exactly 2 months. This coming Saturday will mark exactly 2 months to the day that George Floyd was murdered. But we've already got away. We have already got away from the original reason these protests started. Where are these good police, by the way? As I said, where are they? Talking about this is unjust, this is not good. You see, we have to take a step back with all of these things. And I'm going to get back to General Honoré in a short moment, I promise. We have to get back to context here. And I've always believed that context is extremely important when we are talking about these things. Context is important in every sense. It really is. Context is instructive. This is really important. You had all of these police, remember? Just after the murder of George Floyd by 4 cops. And you had these situations where you had some police in some cities holding hands with protesters in a kumbaya moment. You had some police commanders getting on their knee in New York City in the NYPD, on their knee, taking a knee, and the cameras were there. It was a nice little photo op for everybody. You had some police talking about, oh, let's take this march right now. Woo! I'll go on a march for Black Lives right now. Woo! Indiana, whichever city or state. Take your pick. Take your pick of the state. Take your pick of the city. Oh, yes, and I believe in Black lives, and yes, I took this march, and I thought it was a good idea, and it was spontaneous. Thanks for centering yourself, Mr. White Man. I mean, that's much appreciated. Not. Because where are these people now? Where are these people now who just about 2 months ago were holding hands and, when they weren't ramming their police vans into protesters? Where are they now? Talking about what's going on in Portland, what's going on in Chicago, Detroit, and in cities across this country under a dictator. Now, some of you blanched about that when people like myself and others on Twitter were talking about this guy being a dictator in the White House. Donald Trump, I'm speaking of. Because that is the dictator that I am talking about. And the only one who has been that during his time in the White House. You said, well, it's offensive to call him a dictator because he's not like Mussolini. And I always said to those individuals, stop being so definitional about this. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, or should I say, quacks like a duck. Context is important, but my goodness me, we don't have to wait until, God forbid, we're put in ovens in the United States. That's happened already on this planet, in Nazi Germany and in other areas of Europe during the 1930s and 40s. Happened to Jewish people. I've done episodes about this and about anti-Semitism. I've said this many times. Never again. And what we are seeing right now is, again, we are in that point, in that moment. And this notion that Donald Trump is not a dictator is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm fed up of people saying that it's performative. This ain't performative. This is real. And I know he's doing it for a political reason, obviously. The politics are clear. It's him. He wants to be re-elected. He doesn't give a damn about anybody. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about his supporters. He doesn't care about the country. We know that. This ain't performance. This is real. Yes, he's a reality TV show star and a fraud, but this is real. Stop garnishing your language. This is the thing I have another problem with, language that we use. And I'm going to get to that now with General Honore. The language that we use. And again, where are these police now who are getting on a knee and walking with us and talking? And where are they now on all of this? Where are they now on everybody who's had an eye taken out by police? Where are they now on these thugs in Portland and in all over the country? But I want to get to language. I want to get to language. Because language is critical as well as context. Russell Honore, in that clip I just played, the general said, police don't do this. And as he was saying that, there was video running of these thugs in Portland beating up on a white veteran, Navy veteran, white male veteran, who just stood there taking the beating. By the way, it turns out he had fractured hands. And that's when Honore said, what kind of bullshit is this? Well, the police, by the way, General Honore, with due respect to you, the police do this. They've been doing it for decades and centuries. We get caught up in sound bites, but we don't have necessarily, in many cases, a fuller, more robust, more fulsome discussion about what's happening and how we got to that place. We must have that conversation. We must. And instead of the CNNs of the world doing 1-hour programs or 1-hour documentaries on Donald Trump's conspiracy theories, what you should be doing is 1 or 2-hour conversations, or documentaries, but conversations about Donald Trump's tyranny and Donald Trump's dictatorship. That's what you should be doing, CNN. That's what you should be doing, Fareed Zakaria. Instead of the usual neoliberalist and globalist type of things that you do. And look, Fareed Zakaria was one of the first people that said, he said it on the air, this is the mode of a bullshit artist. That word bullshit gets used a lot on corporate news media. I've used it at least 3 or 4 times so far in this episode, but only because the other people that I've been quoting have used it. Chris Cuomo said it last week on his show on CNN. People have already forgotten that this idiot in the White House posed with a bunch of Goya beans on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. Chris Cuomo was using that word bullshit to describe that in the middle of this pandemic. Oh, do you remember the pandemic? 143,000 people dead. Oh, do you remember? Have you forgotten that just this week, someone, I believe it could have been someone in the CDC or the NIH, said that the totals of people dead and infected right now are probably really 23 up to 23 times higher than what we are being told, what we are aware of. Of course it's much higher than 143,000 people who had died. I have been saying that for a long time. There is no way you can have a virus this contagious and it only infect 3.9 million people in the US. And around the world, only, listen to me, only 600,000 plus people have been killed as a result of it, have died from it. Only, listen to that language. Language is everything. And I think the General Honoré should step back when he talks about police don't do this. Police do this. And all you have to do, and I said this last night on Twitter, at the Popcorn, REEL, that you have to look at history in this country, and many of us don't, because either we're too busy, or we don't care, or we're not interested in history. We're interested in the here and now. And I understand that with some people who they don't want to go back and revise 100 years or 200 years. And I can, to a degree, understand that. People are overwhelmed. So from that point, I can understand. There are going to be people who say, look, I don't care about what happened in 60 or 70 or 80 or the year 1930 or 33. I think you should care about all of those, by the way. Or in 1787 or in 1619 or in 1773. I care about now. I care about 2020. I get that sentiment. I understand to a degree. There are some people who are so overwhelmed, so frustrated, so angry. They've had it. And they can't see past the moment that they are in. Or they can see past it, but it's so overwhelming that if they had to go look back, they would absolutely crumble. To a degree, I understand the sentiment. People are going through a lot in this country and all around the world with this coronavirus. The Republicans are still, we're having trouble coming to an agreement about extending unemployment benefits. Oh, maybe $100 will do. What do you think, Chucky? Why didn't they say that the richest businesses for PPP would get maybe $100? for their trouble. How about that? And these guys are agonizing about, oh, we should give them $100. The $600 that you're getting, that's too much. The billions and trillions of dollars that the richest businesses got for the supposedly small business PPP operation, oh my goodness, that's not enough. But I understand. There are people who've lost loved ones. And people who have lost loved ones or know friends of theirs, had friends who've died from this virus. And I dare say that some of you listening may be in that category. And I am sorry for your loss. I can understand why some people do not care about the history. And they don't care about that because we're in a moment now. But my point is that I think it's important to have context. And if General Honore, and again, this is my reason for saying that we need to have town halls or documentaries about fascism instead of these stupid hour-long things about, Donald Trump's conspiracy theory. We really need to have an education of the American public right now. And with still many people staying at home, still many people practicing physical distancing, still many people wearing masks, this is the time to be educating people and not giving them the fancy soundbite that I just gave you, playing General Honore. Yes, it's righteous indignation. Yes, it's outrage. Yes, it's needed. Yes, we do need to see people pulling their hair out or cursing on the air, because every one of us should be about what's been happening over these last few months. But everybody should have been doing this in 2017 and 18 when Trump put brown people behind bars and separated them from their families. We're doing it now, quite frankly, because white people in Portland are being set upon by a pack of wolves released and unleashed by Chad Wolf, by Bill Barr, Steve Miller, Donald Trump, and Steve Bannon. Let's be absolutely honest about this, speaking about context, and I'm going to get to where I promised to get to. We really do we really need an education in this country. General Honore, I'm sure he's aware of what I'm about to say, but we need an education. We have people, I was on Twitter last night, and I said, this is America, and I included a video of the women, mostly white women, who were being beaten, who call themselves the Wall of Moms. By the way, it was started, that organization, by a black woman or a mixed race woman named, and oh my gosh, and I wish I hadn't, I think Bev Barnum is her name. And by the way, I'd love to talk to her. I know she's very busy at this point. I really would, because this is something, by the way, she started spontaneously. She had no plan when she began this organization. And now there are chapters of it all over the United States of America. So I tweeted out this image and I said, this is America. That was part of the tweet I sent last night. And someone, a follower of mine, said, this is America ? Now that could have taken many turns. It's difficult sometimes to gauge what things on Twitter mean. You've got 140, or in this case, 280 characters. You don't have any real tone unless people use emojis, and some people can't stand emojis and emoticons and all that. I get it. Some people don't. Heck, I never really used to like them. I use them too now because I think it's important to convey tone. And also in your words, you don't have to use them if you don't want to use the emoticons, but just the way you speak on Twitter, and Lord knows I cuss up a storm on it. But the way you speak in situations does look, it's important. All of this is. We need better protection for everybody on Twitter, especially black women, especially white women, especially Latinas, especially Asian women, all women. Because what's going on with this misogyny and death threats online, it continues to be vile and has been for years. And not enough has been done about it at all. Come on, Jack. Hit the road. Or do something about this stuff. Lord knows that Mark Zuckerberg ain't going to do anything. But I decided when I got that response from someone on Twitter who I think follows me, I decided to be a bit more general about things because everybody doesn't know. And this isn't a time to be arrogant. This is a time to be urgent. And so instead of directly going to respond, I thought it better to try. And again, you can interpret this as puffing out my chest, or you can interpret it in any way that you're going to. I thought it better to try to educate individuals, everybody, generally. Because what you saw in that video, and I'm sure you know the video I'm talking about, it's been shown on television, it's been online, of women being tear gassed in the United States. Mothers, women, it doesn't matter if they're mothers or not. Women being tear gassed who are just peacefully protesting. They're being tear gassed. And when I got that, this is America question mark, I decided instead to say, look, yes, this is America. And this has been going on for centuries in this country. And that's not to say that this ain't a big deal, because every one of these things is a BFD, as Joe Biden would say, big fucking deal. That's what he said, by the way. I believe it was 2011. I think it was around the time that Obama had announced that he had the forces had killed, special team forces had killed Osama bin Laden. Remember that? I think May of 2011, whenever that was. But we've got to look at history. We do have to look at history. I understand, barring what I said a few minutes ago, we have to look at history here. We really do. I mean, this is America. We've had tear gassing. Don't you remember that in June of this year? I mean, it's just 7 weeks ago, 6 weeks plus ago, 7 weeks ago. Don't you remember that we had protesters, mostly white ones too, but black ones as well, all kinds of protesters? Don't you remember? It's like what? I mean, June of this year, June 1st, Lafayette Park, Lafayette Square, whatever you call that place in Washington, D.C., Lafayette Park. Don't you remember that this criminal in the White House tear gassed peaceful protesters? Tear gas protesters? Have people forgotten that? Monday, June the 1st, 2020? Yes, this is America. Peaceful protesters doing what we do in the United States, because the First Amendment gives us that freedom of assembly to do it. Freedom of assembly in the United States Constitution. First Amendment. And of course, this wasn't really about a photo op. This was about him committing harm to people. Him being Trump. And then standing there and presiding for a re-election campaign. That's what this is about. It's not about a photo op. It's about a re-election campaign, and about how sadistic and how psychopathic this guy is and this Republican Party is. You want to talk about this is America and this is history? Can we go back? I mean, again, this is what I said in my tweet. We can go back centuries or we can go back 50 years. We can go back to 1963 and Bull Connor. Speaking of General Honore, police don't do this. Well, General, they do this. Bull Connor, Birmingham, Alabama, have we forgotten? See, this is what happens when a country does not remember or learn its history. This is what happens when an education system has been defunded consistently over the years by Republicans. This is what happens. People forget 1963 and Bull Connor and the dogs on black people and the nightsticks on black people, the police beating black people. People forget 1965. I mean, are we that ahistorical? Have we forgotten? I mean, John Lewis passed away less than a week ago. For God's sake, man. The man passed away less than a week ago. Police don't do this. Well, what happened to John Lewis on that bridge? What happened to John Lewis around that bridge, on that bridge, off that bridge in Selma in 1965? Have people forgotten? March 7th, 1965. Bloody Sunday. Yes, General Honore, police do this. Alabama state troopers did this to many people that day in 1965, including the now late John Lewis. It's staggering that a general or anybody could get on the air and say that police don't do this, when police do this every day to black people. It's just staggering, but sadly not surprising. And I get it when you're on a show for 5 minutes, it's soundbite heaven. You don't have the necessary context necessarily, although some people do very well in 5 minutes, giving a very good recitation of history. Anyway, I don't want to pick on the general, but I do want to continue what I'm saying about this is America. And in that tweet I said, go back to 1963 with Bull Connor. And in 1963 as well, people have already forgotten this. George Floyd has not been the first person to have a knee on his neck. If you search the internet, and you can search it, or you can even watch I Am Not Your Negro, the documentary from Raoul Peck, which is a documentary that focuses on a lot of the work and writings of James Baldwin. But it's about a whole lot more. If you go to that documentary, or go on the internet, you will see photos of white male cops, any cops, but in this case, white men, because they seem to be the ones who do this the most. But the point is, this is state violence against black people. And that's the larger point, by the way, that's not being talked about. And it's not being talked about even in Portland. But if you go back to that documentary, I'm Not Your Negro, or go online, look at, there's photos you should find, and you will probably find photos of white male cops putting their knee on the neck of a black woman who is lying on the ground. This has not begun with George Floyd. And I think my frustration, quite frankly, is that we don't study history. We don't study American history at all. Black history is American history. And to call it Black History Month is, quite frankly, in some ways insulting, because it's not only Black History Month, it's Black History Year. It's American History Month, American History Year. Yes, it's Black history, of course. My goodness me, everybody. I think we really have to start opening up our minds and the frame in which we are looking at these things. So in this tweet, again, I said 63, go back to Bull Connor. 65, Bloody Sunday, Selma. My goodness, 1968, the Orangeburg Massacre. Go back to where 3 people were killed. Students. Go back to 1970, Kent State. Students killed. Go back to 1985, the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia. I have mentioned that before on one of these episodes. 1985, a black mayor, W. Wilson Good, with an E on the end. Nothing good about what he did that day in 1985 in Philadelphia. Dropping a bomb on a black family. The Africa family. The MOVE family. MOVE was an organization founded by, I guess, John Africa and a number of people. John Africa was the leader of it. And Mayor Good, the Democratic mayor, W. Wilson Good of Philadelphia, black man, authorized the police to drop a bomb on the house in which these MOVE members were living in. And I guess the police wanted them out of there, and they were living there peacefully. There was no violence. There was nothing. And even if there was, you drop a bomb on their house? I mean, this is not started with 1985 either. But a bomb was dropped and the people inside were killed. And they did damage to the entire block. The police dropped a bomb on that house in 1985. You can look this all up. I am not making this up. W. Wilson Good, with an E on the end of his last name. Please search that. That was 1985. 35 years ago. 35 years ago. Not that long ago. We have forgotten in this country. It's like what David Bowie says in his song Young Americans. Do you remember your President Nixon? Do you remember the bills you have to pay? Or even yesterday?
General, there's an author, a professor up at Yale we have on occasion. He wrote a very small but powerful book called On Tyranny, and it was kind of timed for the start of the Trump presidency. He lays out things to look for in society that you may be teetering on tyranny. Here's the one he says about this. Be wary of paramilitaries. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. And, General, I don't think we're at this point, but a kind of militarized, roving national police force is not what we citizens signed up for. General, there's an author, a professor up at Yale we have on occasion. He wrote a very small but powerful book called On Tyranny, and it was kind of timed for the start of the Trump presidency. He lays out things to look for in society that you may be teetering on tyranny. Here's the one he says about this. Be wary of paramilitaries. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. And General, I don't think we're at this point, but a kind of militarized, roving national police force is not what we citizens signed up for.
Well, we've merged into this SWAT teams, local sheriffs, a police force, a federal FBI, now Border Patrol, all merging themselves into military uniforms. Get the hell out of our uniforms. Our uniforms represent a mission in America to save lives, not to take lives. Do not suppress a people right, but to protect people right to protest. They need to get them out of our uniforms. And I hope this will come out of the next bills coming out of the Senate that force these civil and federal police from wearing military uniforms.
Well, look, I'm with you, General. I am with you. Yes, we need to get them out. And we need to do that this November. But my frustration is, look, Brian Williams, who you also heard in that clip, who's the anchor for Brian Williams, goodness gracious, that's a whole nother episode. But Brian Williams is the anchor on MSNBC for the 11th hour. And that's where you just heard that clip from. That's what took place on Tuesday night of this week. And he referenced the book that I have read out on these episodes in the past. The book On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. A book which is really looming large and is ever prescient. And he released it a few years ago, as Brian Williams explained. But Brian Williams makes a big mistake when he says, we're not here yet. Yeah, we are here. We are here. This is tyranny. This is fascism. And this is definitely authoritarianism as well. This is not performative. I'm fed up of these flowery words. Oh, performative. And I guess they can be used in areas where things are performative. But even if it's true that this stuff is performative, this is real. This is happening. Stop looking at this as some kind of theater. Because of course it's an orchestration. On one level, of course it's a theater. Of course it's an orchestration. But we get stuck up and stuck into and bogged down in the theatrical language that we use. And we try to be so sophisticated when what we really should be doing is getting to the heart of this and using very blunt language. Kind of like the language that General Honoré used. Like words like bullshit. But we shouldn't just use words like that. We should use words like tyranny, fascism, authoritarianism, and Gestapo. Those are words we should be using when we talk about this. Performative. Ooh, let me put on my uniform, my costume. No. We have to start using different language. And I know the media is one of the biggest culprits of this, using very weak language. The New York Times does this with its headlining. Whoever writes those headlines does it deliberately. And in other places, not just the New York Times, with these really weak and inappropriate headlines. Their house could be burning down in the New York Times and they would say something like, someone is, someone with orange unit. I don't know. Analogies. That's another thing that's a problem too. But you know what I mean? The New York Times could literally do that. There could be something going on, and they would completely trivialize it with some really stupid headline that doesn't get anywhere near the gravity of how serious something is. They've done this many times on their front page. Trump urges unity against racism when in actuality, Trump was saying racist things. When CNN and others use words like racially tinged, New York Times does this all the time. Instead of using the word racist, or instead of using the words white racist, or using the words whiteness, or systemic racism. Yes, it exists. But can you start to break down what that means and how pervasive it is, instead of using those two words like they are glamour words, and they're not glamour words. I want people to be educated. One of the reasons why, quite frankly, I am doing this podcast is to try to raise awareness, to try to get people to look at things a little bit differently, or to at least entertain and think about them a little bit differently, to engage in some form of critical thinking. Now, I'm not here to change your mind. Only you can choose to do that if you want to. I'm here to present the facts, to present documentation, to explain, to contextualize. I think it's very important, again, to use context. And Brian Williams, the tyranny is here. It's happened. It's been happening. Oh, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, do people forget Ferguson? Speaking of what I said in the previous segment about This Is America, did people forget 2014? I mean, again, that's what scares the hell out of me, is the short memories of Americans. Of course, none of this stuff gives me any joy. Certainly not seeing what happened to, certainly not what happened to George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks or Breonna Taylor or Tatiana Jefferson or any of these individuals, Ahmaud Arbery, or Eric Garner. I can go for hundreds of names, for hundreds of years. We have such short memories. I mean, are people going to forget that we have all these hundreds of thousands of people dead in this country? I mean, have people forgotten about the unemployment rates in this country? 1.4 million people, by the way, applied for unemployment this past week. That's an increase over the previous weeks. And the first time it's increased in a number of weeks. But listen to that number, 1.4 million. And this weekend, unemployment benefits expire. And speaking of, do you remember your President Nixon? Do you remember the bills you have to pay? Or even yesterday, I think people do remember the bills they have to pay. Because by the end of this month, anybody who has been using unemployment benefits and that extra money and that extra $600 that people are using, you may be one of those individuals, that money is going to run out. That money is going to run out. And then what happens to all of these millions of people? There are forecasts saying 20 to 30 million people may be evicted. These moratoriums on evictions in some cities are going to end. In many cities in this country are going to end. Now, there's been one or two that have signed on an extension through the end of October. This is what happens when you don't have a country that deals with and wants to help everybody. In other countries, as I've talked about before, in Denmark, for example, they pay the wages of the people in the entire country through a deal with their employers for as long as this pandemic runs. And not only do they do that, they also give them additional monies for dealing with groceries, for dealing with all these things. They are a government that takes care of its citizenry. And you judge a country by how it treats the most vulnerable citizens in the country, the most vulnerable people in the country. And look at what the United States has done over the many hundreds of years, talking about the most vulnerable people. Look at how it's treated the most vulnerable people. Look at how it's treating the most vulnerable people today. Look at what's happened with the coronavirus pandemic. You don't want to give ventilators to people. You don't want to give ventilators to governors, but you don't mind bringing in federal thugs to beat people, to kill people, to blind people. You don't mind that though, do you, Donald? You won't give ventilators to all these states. You give them ventilators that are broken, like you did in California, in Los Angeles. You give all these governors broken ventilators or no ventilators. You have them bidding against each other for ventilators on the open market. You get off on that. And you also get off on doing this. You have governors fighting each other for PPE and ventilators. And you won't give them any to save their hundreds of thousands of citizens. But you will make a show of it, and you will go and send in troops and federal agents and thugs to all of these cities, all Democratic cities, by the way, that they're voting Democratic in. This is nothing but a voter suppression strategy. Because it's all about his re-election, his ambition to get, or re-stealing, I should say, of the election. That's what this is all about. And this weekend, your benefits will run out. Your $600. And what's Congress doing about that, by the way? Republicans arguing with each other. Oh, maybe $100 might be too much. And there are arguments about that. They weren't saying that about these billion-dollar companies getting PPP. Not a word. Not a syllable. You need to vote these folks out. If they are debating about whether you should get $100, not 600, 100, and they were complaining about the 600, Lindsey Graham, Ben Sass, Republicans, and others, Tim Scott. Only one of those, to the best of my knowledge, of those three I've mentioned, only one of them is running this November, Lindsey Graham. But any other Republican senator who's running, vote them out. Any Republican governor who's running, vote them out. Any Republican House member who is running, vote them out. Vote Donald Trump out. Vote out any Republican on your local ballot. Vote them out. And I would also look at progressive Democrats to vote in. Because we've got some Democrats here who haven't been doing their jobs either. Some of them have not been pulling their weight. Nancy Pelosi. She's not the only one, though. And she's the most prominent one. And while she's done some great things, and I've said, I think one of her best moments was the impeachment, even though it took us, we were telling her for the better part of nearly 2 years that you needed to impeach this guy. By the way, you can impeach him another 4 times for what he's done just this week alone. But no, it's not going to happen. I mean, the Republicans use their power destructively, but to their advantage. I mean, in an election year, for God's sake, do people forget that in 2016, or I should say in the previous year, 2015, Hillary Clinton, in October of that year, was, during the middle of her campaign, told to come into Congress by the Republicans who owned the majority at that time in the House, subjected her to almost 11 hours of questioning. And they knew it was bogus. I mean, Kevin McCarthy admitted it. That cost him the speakership, by the way. Admitting that on television, on Good Morning America or whomever it was. That, yeah, I think it was Good Morning. It doesn't matter. It was on the media. That they did this to hurt her campaign, her election campaign. That's what this was about. And ultimately, we know what happened in 2016. But the Republicans used their power destructively and to their ends. They were able to use their power. They got her off her campaign trail. Why didn't she? Oh gosh, I'm not even going to go there. But my goodness me, how do you not campaign in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania for months on end? What? How? And then go to Pennsylvania 3 or 4 days before the election. And you lost. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. The Democrats need to wake up as well here. Do not take us for granted. We're going to vote for you. I will. I'll be voting for Joe Biden. I've said this many times, and I've had issues with Joe Biden. But we need to continue to push Democrats as well. Fight. Fight, fight, fight. They're supposed to be having these conversations this weekend or this week. The Senate's going to go on a break, I think, next week. And then August recess. They'll be out for the whole month of August. Through Labor Day beyond. I mean, this is what's happening now. Call Congress 202-225-3121. Tell whichever senator, whomever, it's going to be obviously McConnell because he's running this year. This is an election year. Call these folks. Use the 5 calls app. 5 calls app. The number 5 and the word CALLS. Please call these folks now. Tell them to get their finger out. Well, you be passionate, but be respectful. When you leave the voicemail, let them know you're ticked off, but you don't have to be cursing at them and all that or calling them names, because that's you're going to be just ignored. But let them know that you have had enough of this nonsense and that you want your benefits or whomever this applies to extended, or you want your benefits, you want that $600 to continue, whatever it is. People all over this country are relying on that. And it's barely getting any conversation in the media. Barely. This is the thing. The distractions. The distractions from the fact that over 140,000 people are dead. The distractions from the fact that Russians like Vladimir Putin, let's get to that. Putin is paying. See, that's not even being talked about anymore. The press are not asking this guy Trump any question about it. And that's where the media falls short for me as well. You're not asking this guy a word about Putin paying Afghans, rebels, to kill American military personnel. And that's a dereliction of his duty in the White House, but it's also a dereliction of the press duty as a member of the Fourth Estate to sit there and not ask him anything, Chris Wallace, about that. Nobody has, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has. Instead, it's all about Portland. It's all about this and that. And what do you say to that? And Mayor Lightfoot, how do you respond to what she's saying? I mean, this is not journalism. This is tabloid garbage. I almost said that other word, bullshit. Ooh, I did say it. Come on, folks. Again, this is about context. This is happening here, Brian Williams. Tyranny is here. Oh, I don't think... I mean, it happened again. This happened in 2014 in Ferguson. And everybody's forgotten Ferguson and Michael Brown and the protests there and the tanks in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. I mean, people forgot. We need to have people be educated, and we need to have people prepared to vote. How did we get here? Look at the Patriot Act. The very act that Barbara Lee also voted against. The Patriot Act. That's how we got to Portland. That's how we got to Ferguson. We got to Ferguson in 2014 when the police were driving tanks through black communities. We got to Ferguson through George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and particularly George W. Bush putting in all this money to states, and Congress, quite frankly, supporting it. All this money in state budgets, all this money that the federal government was giving to these states to militarize police. I mean, that's where all this is. This is one of the places this came from. I mean, just the other day I talked about gardening. Didn't I invoke, several episodes ago, didn't I not invoke Dwight D. Eisenhower's outgoing address to the nation in 1961? Did I not mention to you, did I not play that audio of Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, as president, talking about we must guard against the growing influence of the military-industrial complex? That's what he said in 1961. Speaking about This Is America. Please, please, for those of you out there that this applies to, please study your history. Please study it. I know right now you're preoccupied with far more important things than history. You've got life things to be dealing with. We all do. I'm just saying that people make these comments about things and they are either uninformed, they don't remember, or they are ahistorical, or they are completely conscientiously stupid and know that this is going on and choose to pretend that it's not. Or they are gaslighting you. But please, I mean, Eisenhower talked about this in 1961. And here we are, the military-industrial complex. You've got them all over your streets now. You had them in Ferguson. And Congress voted on this. And they voted on the Patriot Act. They voted on the Patriot Act. There were a few who didn't. There are a few people in the Congress who didn't, and one in the Senate. May have been Lincoln Chafee. I don't remember. But the vast majority of people voted for all these things. Section 103 of the Patriot Act. Let me get to actually Section 104 of the Patriot Act. Requests, this is the title of section. People, please listen to what I'm trying to say to you. Section 104 of the Patriot Act. The title of Section 104. Requests for military assistance to enforce prohibition in certain emergencies. Requests for military assistance to enforce prohibition in certain emergencies. I think I can just leave that there. And I know that the section talks about, Section 2332E of Title 18 is amended, Okay, fine. But let me tell you, the Patriot Act that people voted on in 2001 or 2, October 2001 or October 2002, I always forget. Actually, October 2002 was the vote for the Iraq War. That's what that was. October 2001 was the vote for the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act gave sweeping powers to the federal government to do all kinds of things, whether it was surveillance, wiretapping. This is under George W. Bush. The same George W. Bush who went into Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan in 2001, which is what I played at the top here, with Representative Barbara Lee standing up and voting against that. 3 days after 9/11/01. That took a lot of guts to do. And it is black women so often in this country who have the guts, who stand up with the conviction and with the integrity and principle to really warn this nation. It historically has been black women. It's been Harriet Tubman, who led an army into battle. The U.S. Army recruited her and said to her, they came to her and said, "Can you do this for us?" She led battalions. She freed many black people from bondage and enslavement. There should be monuments of Harriet Tubman all over this country. Monuments. And I know that the House voted yesterday to get rid of Supreme Court Chief Justice Robert Taney. The bust of Robert Taney, Roger Taney, who is an owner of black people as property and the Chief Justice, believe the first Supreme Court Chief Justice that we had, or one of them, who wrote that evil Dred Scott decision that basically said that black men have no rights, that black people have no rights that white men are bound to respect. That guy who was actually just kicked out, basically. He was disgraced, even then. Dred Scott v. Sanford, a Supreme Court decision in this country. But yesterday the House voted, and there were about 100 Republicans who voted against it. And I'm going to put their names on Twitter. Louis Gohmert, Jim Jordan, who has, I think, some explaining to do. His days as a wrestling coach at Ohio State, when he looked the other way when boys were being brutalized and raped, molested. And that guy's in Congress. That guy is in Congress. Republican. These people are absolutely disgraceful. And they all voted against removing the bust of Chief Justice Roger Taney at the time. This is, again, he was Chief Justice in the 1800s of the U.S. Supreme Court. They voted against that. This guy was a racist. He was someone who owned black people's property. And these 110, 113 Republicans voted against having his bust removed from the U.S. Capitol. Are you kidding? And this was also about replacing the bust of Taney with Frederick Douglass. And those Republicans said, no, we don't want an abolitionist here. We don't want a black man who himself was enslaved, who educated himself, and then became one of the greatest abolitionists this country ever witnessed. We don't want that guy's bust here to replace the racist and the enslaver and oppressor Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice. We don't want that. We don't want Frederick Douglass to replace him. 100 plus Republicans. You should vote every one of those people out on principle, right there, alone on that. How did we get here? How did we get here? Well, I'm telling you how we got here. Look at the history of the country. Look at the Patriot Act, Section 104. I'll tell you something else about the Patriot Act. And again, a lot of people voted for this. A lot of Democrats as well. Now, there were a few Democrats who stood up against it. Stood up against it. I mean, this Patriot Act gave the federal government wide latitude. It gave specifically anybody who'd become the chief executive of the country, president of the country, wide latitude, wiretapping, internet stuff. You can get people's credit card information. And surprise, surprise, credit card fraud. I mean, where do you think this credit card fraud came from? Where do you think all of these, multiple corporations are reporting a hack of their accounts? Where do you think this all came from? The Patriot Act made this easier to happen, by the way. There's provisions. I mean, the USA Patriot Act is basically 1.5 billion pages long. Nobody's going to read the darn thing. Nobody. But it is there on the internet to read. It is there. If you want to know where all of this stuff came from and how we have now Border Patrol agents on the streets of Portland and Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, Baltimore, Philadelphia, all Democratic cities, I'm telling you, this is obviously voter suppression. And, it's obvious. I mean, it's so clear. In the Patriot Act, you want to know how all of these Border Patrol people and these folks, Department of Homeland Security, that came through the Patriot Act and other legislation. Congress approved it. Nancy Pelosi was one of them. Many of these people who were running were there voting for this stuff. You want to know how it all happened? The Patriot Act tripled the number of Border Patrol, of Customs Service, INS personnel along the northern border of this country. And believe me, along the southern border, we know what has happened in the last 3 years. This taking of kids, brown kids, from their parents, throwing them in concentration camps. And of course, we had this with the Japanese here, Japanese Americans here in the 1940s in San Francisco, California, put in camps during World War II or just after or during it. And a Democratic president signed off on that. Executive Order 9066. I've talked about this previously. Roosevelt, FDR. I mean, come on, folks. This is America. You drop bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we're coming up on an anniversary of that. And we're coming up on August the 6th, 1945 anniversary. Commemoration. It's not an anniversary. It's a commemoration. August 6th, 1945, and I believe August 8th or 9th as well. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This country dropped nuclear bombs under a Democratic president, Truman. This is violence. You drop bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then you have a black mayor dropping bombs on a family in Philadelphia, a black family, the Move family, in 1985. 40 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that's a microcosm of what happened in Philadelphia in 85, a microcosm of what happened in 1945. Yes, we must commemorate and never forget what happened in 1945 to Japanese people at the hands of this government. Look at what we did in Vietnam. 2 million Vietnamese killed. Iraq. We can go on and on. But we can't forget what happened in 1985. I mean, we have the commemorations year after year about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as we should. But we don't have any commemoration about this black family being murdered in Philadelphia. The Move family being bombed. The police drop bombs, killing a family in Philadelphia, here in the U.S., 1985, and there's no real commemoration of it. You don't see that blasted across the national news. You might see it locally in Philadelphia, if you're lucky, in their news. But the country is completely, doesn't know anything about 1985, for God's sake. The national media doesn't cover it. They don't cover what happened to that black family. We need context. We need history. We need that. This country has become ahistorical. And the Republicans are defunding education everywhere they can. They're rewriting textbooks. We need a counter narrative. And we need to vote this November. And that's why you're seeing Border Patrol people on the streets now because of the Patriot Act under George W. Bush, who strangely these days is being thought of not as a war criminal that he actually was and is, but as this fuzzy, kinder, gentler version of George H.W., who's no longer with us, his own dad. I mean, how quickly we forget, right? That's what I'm concerned about. I'm obviously concerned about what's happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I keep saying her name so quickly. Let me speak slowly. And Tatiana Jefferson. I'm concerned about what's happened to Rayshard Brooks. Of course I am. And I'm going to continue to speak up about this and raise awareness and history and context and all those things. But what about the short memory of the country, of people? And this coronavirus has created a new level of anxiety and fear and worry, obviously, and death and panic and fear and everything. And when you're in that kind of state, you don't have any control of much of anything. Yeah, I know I sound alarmist, perhaps, to some of you listening. But I think that we really do have to be really urgent here with what we are facing. And really to remind you to please check your voter registration every week. We really need to be on the ball here. And yes, these are urgent times. It's important to be urgent here. I know it may sound alarmist. I may sound that way to some people. But I'm sorry, the language that you're hearing on the corporate news media doesn't cut it, which is why you have to listen to freespeech.org, which is a progressive group of people who do the news, who do analysis, who do discussion, if you have the time for any of that. This passive language and speechifying and sound biting will not do. It won't. And the reason why you have all these Border Patrol people and ICE people as now on the streets of your city, these thugs, is because of the USA Patriot Act, which many people in Congress, some of whom are still there, voted for. And none of that was talked about on Brian Williams' show. General Honore, Tom Ridge and Michael Chertoff, those guys led the Department of Homeland Security and... Come on, man. Chertoff was the one in which the Patriot Act was unleashed under. And certainly Tom Ridge. My goodness, man, have we forgotten? See, that's what I'm scared of, quite frankly. Along with everything else, what I fear is that we have forgotten. And I know we have. No one's asking questions about Russia, about the Putin paying Afghani rebels to kill Americans. I mean, that to me is a real issue. And look, another real issue is this voter suppression and these Republicans. No one's really talking about the Republicans who are stealing right now and doing it with Russia's help as well. But no one's talking about these legislatures who across the country are stealing your vote. Which is why I say you have to check your voter registration once a week through the end of October. If this guy, Trump, has gone so far, or maybe not so far, because this has been going on forever, to rendition people. That happened in Iraq. People were renditioned, waterboarded, renditioned, and that means scooted away. They were just grabbed. No words, just grabbed. You just snatch them up, grab them, take them to some unknown location, and hold them there. Never saying what they're held for, nothing. That's happening in Portland now. I mean, this is Niemöller time. Freespeech.org. Please. Tom Hartman, Randy Rhodes, and others of that ilk. Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, Joe Madison on Sirius XM Radio Channel 126, Roland Martin Unfiltered on YouTube. You need to be listening to these folks. You need to be listening to these people. Believe me. You have to. Barbara Lee was absolutely right. We have, are we becoming the enemy? Yeah, the evil? Yeah. We've been that for so long in this country, though. And we need to change it. I think the wall of moms, I think all these protesters who've been out there long before, the protesters who are protesting every day, and the media's not covering all of it. They're only covering it now because it's for their ratings. Let's meet corporate news media to you. Can you have a conversation about how we got to this point? Can you have a conversation about fascism and about authoritarianism and about tyranny? Instead of just limiting it to 5 minutes with a general who seems to have forgotten that the police do act like this, and they have for centuries. It came from the enslavement patrols in this country. I mean, have we completely lost our memories, much less our minds?
Everything that's been said here, I think, is about this particular issue is right, but doesn't go far enough. We are talking, this is not just performative authoritarianism. This is authoritarianism. These are paramilitary units. These are the kinds of things that we have seen in tyrannical authoritarian regimes in third world countries throughout the second half of the 20th century. This is not a mystery what's going on here. And I think that to look at this through the prism of symbolic politics, the law and order campaign, Trump trying to rerun the Nixon playbook is true, but doesn't, as I say, go far enough. We are looking, I think, here, and this is a dark, and I don't want to be overly alarmist about this, but I think this is the time to be alarmist, knowing where Donald Trump stands right now politically, understanding where we are headed in this election. I think we are looking at potentially a trial run for a kind of a genuine attempt to through intimidation and potentially through force to try to steal this election. And I think we are now at the point where, we see the things that the president is doing. We see his intention to not accept an outcome of this election where he loses to Joe Biden. He's making it very clear. And some of it is rhetoric about mail-in voting. But when the next thing in the next breath is that he's talking about sending these unmarked paramilitary guards to places with blue states with very blue cities run by Democratic mayors, I think we should all take very seriously the prospect that this is, as I say, a dress rehearsal, a trial run for first an attempt at voter intimidation on election day. Are these unmarked paramilitary units going to be doing security at the polls in battleground states? I think that's a question we'd like to have answered. That is potentially an effort at voter intimidation. And then what happens in the overtime period? Anybody who's serious about this election recognizes, listening to the president, that there's a very high likelihood that he is not going to concede if he loses on election night. In those 2.5 months after election day until January 20th, if Donald Trump has lost this election, the things that we're seeing right now, these incredibly alarming, incredibly disturbing images, unmarked paramilitary units that have no clear chain of command, no clear identification, taking protesters and putting them in unmarked vehicles, driving them away to God knows where. We should all be kind of freaking out about this right now and what it could portend for this fall and beyond.
I think you put it pretty perfectly, John Heilman. Yamiche also.
Yeah, he did. John Heilman. And as far as I know, he's a Republican. I've been told that. And somebody who knows John Heilman or his political record and affiliation better than I, much better than I, can chime in on that. I haven't looked it up. I'll just be honest, frank with you. But this is what I've been saying now for a number of weeks. I said this back in May. I have done episodes on this. I think it was actually last month, June of this year, 2020. I have done episodes on this, and I have said that one of the things Republicans are doing right now is training all kinds of voters and, training all kinds of workers and people in former Navy SEALs to be poll watchers. And True the Vote, Catherine Engelbrecht's True the Vote, which is really a voter suppressing organization, claiming to be voter fraud. 31 instances of voter fraud out of billions of voters since 2000. Between 2000 and 2014, 31 instances of voter fraud out of billions of voters. This is not a thing, folks. Voter suppression is very much a thing. Millions of people's votes suppressed in the 2016 election. And as I said a few weeks ago, last month, in one of the episodes I've done, that the Republicans are doing this now. They're training 50,000 people. And you heard John Harmon. John Harmon is the only one in the corporate news media who has sufficiently raised the alarm in the way it should be raised. Now, that was on Morning Joe on Tuesday of this week, the 21st of July, 2020. That clip is not played nearly enough. We get the Russell Honore clip about bullshit and, oh, police don't do this. Of course they do this, right, General? Come on. John Heilman is the one who should be listened to here. And it's not that I agree with him all the time. I don't. I don't agree with a lot of what he says, quite frankly. But he's absolutely right here. He's absolutely correct here. And he said exactly what I've been saying throughout this episode. This ain't about performative anything. This is the real friggin' deal, folks. And we need to be alarmed. I'll go even further. And John Heilman said it in that clip. We need to be alarmed. And we need to do something about this. We need to vote. We need to contact members of Congress, as I've told you, 202-225-3121. We can do something about this. We are going to be afraid, and we should acknowledge that. I am not saying do not be afraid of this. I am not saying don't have feelings. Of course you should. I am saying do not put your head in the sand. And do not turn around, and just because you want to run away from this stuff, it doesn't mean that you running away from it is going to make this stuff disappear. At some point, we have to act. And by acting, I mean whether you think you're comfortable, are you comfortable doing your exercising your First Amendment rights? Because that's not what this guy wants in the White House. As John Harmon said, this guy here is going to do anything, and I've said this myself before, he will do anything to avoid going to prison. Anything. This guy's a criminal. This is documented. Go and read David K. Johnston's book. Middle name C-A-Y. David K. Johnston. The Making of Donald Trump. Go and read that book. David K. Johnston has known Donald Trump for 40 years. David K. Johnston is a Republican. David K. Johnston is someone who breaks this down better than most. Go and read that book. The Making of Donald Trump. You tell me if he's not. I mean, Johnston talks about the criminal activity that Donald Trump is part of. Donald Trump's a crook. He's a criminal. And a criminal will use criminal means to get whatever he or she wants. He used it to get into the White House in the first place. And you see all the criminal things he's been doing since. He's been doing these things for 40 years. Discriminating against black people in housing. Come on. The Central Park ad that he did. Bring back the death penalty. And, those boys did it when they clearly didn't. This guy, doing nothing when Vladimir Putin, his buddy, pays Afghan rebels to murder Americans. Are you kidding? American military personnel. This is the guy that said he loves American heroes when they're not caught. And he castigated, you all have forgotten, John McCain. And I didn't agree with most of what John McCain did in Congress, in the Senate. This is one of the guys that stood up against Dr. King's holiday. He was vehemently opposed to it until he finally caved. Among other things. Bomb Iran. That's what John McCain said. That John McCain is also a war hero. And I respect the service of John McCain and anybody else. who put their lives on the line for this country. And John McCain and many others, black veterans in Vietnam, the black Vietnam vets, those black men who stood up and fought valiantly, the black men, the Tuskegee Airmen, and any other man who stands up for this country, woman who stands up for the United States, proudly defending the country. They may not agree with what the war effort is, but they stand, many of them black and brown, and poor white people standing. And you've got a guy in the White House who looks the other way, a so-called commander-in-chief who looks the other way, as Vladimir Putin pays Afghan rebels. Vladimir Putin, an enemy of this country, the U.S., an enemy to the U.S., Russia. Stop calling them adversaries. They're enemies to the country. And the enemy is paying the Afghan rebels to kill American military personnel. And what does this commander-in-chief, so-called commander-in-chief, or should I say commander-in-theft, commander-in-thief, what does he do? Looks the other way, doesn't do anything about it. He knew about this for over a year, and he's done nothing to stop it. And if that guy does nothing to stop American military personnel from being murdered, what do you think he's going to do about American people here domestically? About people in this country? You've already seen what he's done at the border with brown people, and not many of you said anything about it, did you? You went back and ate your breakfast. You went back and had your, you said pasta, you said pasta Grey Poupon, as brown people were being separated from their families. Families torn apart. But now you see it. Well, better late than never. And I now see that some of you are doing something about this. You're getting in the street non-violently. You're creating good trouble, as John Lewis said. And keep doing that. Keep being non-violent. Because you, by your non-violence, are showing the world that you are on the right side of history. And that these thugs and these cops all over the country are on the wrong side. Just like Bull Connor was on the wrong side of history. This is our time to stand up, and we must write Congress. We must vote. Check your registration. If this guy, as I said, is going to do this, is going to look the other way as American military are murdered, what do you think he's going to do to you, to your friend, your family, your spouse? This guy is already starting this war here. This ain't performative, and John Harmon's correct, and I've been saying it throughout this hour and a half plus. This is real. And I believe that many Americans, many people in general, are waking up and are standing up. Because if this guy can do all these things to the military, can do all this kind of thing, taking money from the military to build a wall, seriously? Come on now. This guy does not care about America. How many times do I have to tell you? This is all documented. He took money from the military to build his wall, which is not even been built yet. He's only built about 3 miles of it so far, or whatever the heck it is. Not very much. Oh, Mexico was going to pay for it. Yeah, right. The military's paying for it. American taxpayers, you are paying for it. We have to be real here. And again, I want to thank John Harmon. And look, I don't want to listen. I do want to thank him, though, because this is the kind of thing that needs to be said. This is what needs to be said. And all of this nonsense of these sound bites, we need to have John Harmon and other people Cornel Ware, or whomever. I mean, you name the people you think should be at that meeting. Should be at a meeting, a town hall, air it live. Put it online, put it on television. Broadcast it around the world to talk about fascism and tyranny and talk about what Donald Trump and these Republicans are doing and give some education to this. It didn't just begin with Donald Trump. And quite frankly, it didn't just begin with the Patriot Act, as I've alluded to. But the Patriot Act is one of the reasons. It's one of the major reasons that you have this proliferation of Border Patrol in the streets of cities all over this country. And you can't have this. Border Patrol is not for New York City. Border Patrol is for the borders. Notice you're not finding people on TV supporting this stuff. The average person, either the media is not showing them or they're nowhere to be found because most of them don't believe in this. This is wrong. This is wrong. This violates any notion of democracy, what little there is of that. This violates the Constitution of this country. It clearly does. And even those folks who owned black people as property, reprehensible as they are and were, evil as they were, some of those folks are probably turning in their grave right now. This is exactly what's going on. John Harmon's absolutely right. We are absolutely at a point now where this guy will do anything. And I said this many times. I said this last month. These guys are going to try to steal another election. And they've been exposed. This guy was impeached. He tried to do the dirty on Joe Biden. And now what he's going to do once that failed because the impeachment prevailed and these cowards in the Senate did not vote him out. These 52 Republican cowards. Oh, I'm so afraid to stand up to the president. I'm so afraid. But Barbara Lee showed courage, didn't she? Representative Barbara Lee. And for those of you in Oakland and everywhere else that she represents there in the East Bay in Northern California, please vote her back in. That's somebody with principle and integrity. Representative Barbara Lee, who 3 days after 9/11/2001 stood up and said, you know what? Yeah, I grieve for these families. It's a terrible time. But this legislation here, we cannot become the evil that we are fighting against. We can't be having this. And I'm going to vote against it. I'm going to vote against going into Afghanistan. That takes a lot of freaking guts to say 3 days after a terror attack. Maybe for some of you that's not gutsy enough. Maybe it isn't. But I think that takes a certain amount of guts. Her electoral seat on the line, she'd put principle and integrity ahead of an election that she was going to be facing the following year. And she voted against the Patriot Act as well. But none of these 52 cowards in the Republican Senate in this country could vote to convict Donald Trump of all these crimes. All of a sudden, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Except Mitt Romney. On abuse of power. Not, we don't want to do. You see, and look where we are now. You need to vote every one of those Republican senators out as well, as I said earlier. Vote them out. Had it not been for that cowardice in February of 2020, when 52 of these Republican senators said, we are quitting him, we wouldn't be at this point right now. More than likely we would not, with all of these thugs on the streets. We would not. I doubt it very, very much. I don't think Mike Pence would have done this. I don't think any other person would have done this. I doubt it. Maybe Tom Cotton would, though. He of the 47 Republican traitors from 2015 who were writing letters to Iran and telling Iran, hey, look, don't make a deal with him about the arms treaty, because that guy, President Obama, hey, he might lose the next election and we're having elections here and da-da-da-da-da. And now that Iran arms treaty deal has been scrapped by Donald Trump. And you had Tom Cotton earlier this year, a few weeks ago now, in the New York Times about send in the troops. Remember that? Has anybody remembered that? Damn, I mean, come on, folks. The New York Times, and they got a lot of heat for this, and rightly so. A few weeks ago, Tom Cotton, that article, that op-ed, his fascism op-ed, which it really was. It was absolutely cheerleading fascism. Send in the troops. And where are we now, America? Where are we now? Portland, Oakland, Chicago, Albuquerque, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City. What do they all have in common? Black and brown populations. Heavy black and brown populations. What else do they all have in common? They vote mainly Democratic. This is naked voter suppression. Vote stealing. He couldn't get Joe Biden. He couldn't get dirt on him because he got impeached. So now the next remedy is to go after you. That's what Donald Trump is doing with the help of Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, that racist who hates himself. That's a guy, Stephen Miller. He's Jewish and he hates being Jewish. He absolutely, I'm convinced he hates himself. He is self-loathing. The things that he's doing, he is evil, he is racist, he is definitely an evil, racist person. And by definition, if you're racist, you are evil. The architects of all of this, right now, all that has happened, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, and Bill Barr, the Attorney General, winking in a photo yesterday at Donald Trump when he gave this Law and Order garbage. Law and Order, the biggest crook on the block, the biggest criminal on the block, who's shouting about, rigged elections, when he's the one rigging them. He's the one doing it. Donald Trump, as you know, is somebody who either says the opposite of what he means, either he lies his ass, which means he lies his ass off. He obviously does the opposite of what he means. When he attacks China in public, he exports all these goods, all these, these imports from them, rather. Takes all these imports, 8,000 tons or whatever the heck it was this week we found out of imports. And Ivanka gets all this patent trademarking with China. I mean, this is just insidious and evil. Donald Trump, when Donald Trump says make America great again, he means destroy America. When Donald Trump says, law and order, he means criminality and disorder and lawlessness. When Donald Trump says, we're going to send in troops to quell these people who are not being violent, by the way, in all these cities, he means we're going to send in jackbooted thugs and Gestapo to be violent. And you're seeing it play out right in front of you. There's no genius about him. I hear people go, ooh, wow, he's bold, he's brash, he's doing it right in your face. That's sexy. There's nothing sexy about this. There's going to be that 1 or 2% of you who think, yeah, ooh, I love this. You get turned on by fascism, don't you? Some people do. Ooh, he's so sexy. Ooh, yeah, he's doing all of this bad stuff. There is a mindset like that in this world, in this country. That authoritarian mindset that follows everything that someone does. The authoritarian follower follows the authoritarian leader. This is no time for bullshit, in the words of Ronald, to use a word from General Honore. This is time for what I've been talking about here. And this is really time for us to start thinking about what kind of country we want, thinking about what our values are and what our value system is, thinking about which of these two parties represents that best or better, and thinking about stopping this trauma. And one of the best ways to do that, among all the activities that you do in a day that try to clear your mind, take a walk, take a run, do exercise, do meditation, do mindfulness, one of the other things you have to do is vote. Have a plan to vote. Have that plan now, because this guy is going to, I said this before and many others have too, these next 6 months are going to be hellacious in this country. That's the truth. Now you know, now you've been warned, now you see this in front of you. Women are being attacked. Black people all over this country have been attacked for hundreds of years. You've seen brown people thrown into camps, Japanese Americans thrown into camps. The Patriot Act now being used in full force. You've got military all over your streets, all over your streets. You have, in 1961, Dwight D. Eisenhower, outgoing presidential address. We must guard against the growing influence of the military-industrial complex. We must guard against the military-industrial complex. And look where we are. We haven't guarded against it. We've been matadors for it. Now you got these jackbooted military thugs from the Border Patrol and ICE and all these things. These are agencies dealing with national security, not with domestic stuff. And it's just domestic stuff, meaning First Amendment right to protest. Come on, folks. This is not performative. And again, that stuff that John Harmon said, please, I'm gonna tweet that out at the popcorn REEL. Please, you have to pay attention. Vote. Check your registration every week through October, through the end of October. Now, start now, once a week. People are being taken off the voting rolls. And if you find out that you're one, if you keep checking long enough, you can register again, re-register online and make sure it's all confirmed and you've got receipts and all of that. Take screenshots, but make sure you keep checking, because I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of people in this country who are going to get a nice, nasty surprise on November 3rd if they choose to go and vote in person, because there's still going to be, even during this pandemic, millions of people who will go to their voting booth. One of the things I also suggest, by the way, is to keep checking on vote by mail. If you do not get your mail-in ballot, make sure that you have a plan to show up in person. And right now, you need to be calling your Secretary of State or your Board of Elections and say to them, what happens if I don't receive my mail-in ballot and I want to come in and vote? Believe me, this is something we need to do, and I'm going to do what I have to do here to make this clear to people here in the United States, because there's so many scenarios where people get provisional ballots and they really don't get counted in a lot of states. This is, I'm telling you, I did an episode on this with Greg Palast a few weeks back, about a month ago, talking about all of what I'm saying about this voting. And he talked about these issues. His book is called How Trump Stole 2020. Greg Palast, last name Palas as in Sam, T as in Tom. You need to read that book. Check your voter registration once a week, every week through October. Have a game plan to vote now. Don't wait till October or November to do this. And my advice to you, if you are in a state that votes early, please vote early. There's going to be intimidation. We're already seeing it on these streets. Vote early. Donald Trump is trying to stop the post office. Why? Vote by mail. He wants to shut that off. This guy is using every means of his power, illegally or legally, to shut down the Constitution and shut you down. He is a dictator. And we need to start looking at the truth of that and listen to what John Heilman and others now are saying and have been saying that you don't hear on the corporate news media. But the reason why I mention John Heilman is because he's the only one in the corporate media, because most people in the country watch the corporate news media. They don't watch Democracy Now! They should. They don't listen to Joe Madison, although he does have a robust radio audience. They should listen to Joe Madison, the Black Eagle, on Sirius XM Radio, channel 126. Paid subscription, but very important. It's worth the $20 if you can spare it. They should listen to Roland Martin for free. You can watch him for free on YouTube. Roland Martin Unfiltered. They should be listening to Randy Rhodes. You can watch her on Twitter for free at Randy Rhodes, RandiRhodes. 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday. I think it's around 12 o'clock Pacific, I forget, something like that. It is 12 o'clock Pacific, 3 Eastern. Joe Madison's show is 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, 3 a.m. Pacific, 6 a.m. Eastern. 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Tom Hartman, I think, 12 p.m. Pacific. And Randy Rhodes, 3 p.m. 12 p.m. Eastern for Tom Hartman. And Randy Rhodes, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. Roland Martin, I think 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. You have to listen to these folks. Watch them and listen to them. Okay? Please, check your voter registration. You have to. Every week. Please do so. Please, please, please. I know I've gone on a little bit longer than perhaps I should, but this is really important. Now is the time. We don't want a repeat of 2016. We do not want to see. We've seen now for over 3.5 years what Donald Trump means when he says, make America great again. He means destroy America. That's what he means. And if you like that kind of thing and think that somehow voting for this guy is going to save you, and when he gets the second term, if he does, I don't think he will, but if he does, do you think he's somehow going to spare you? He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about his supporters. He doesn't. Why would he care about his supporters? Do you think someone would care about their supporters telling them to show up at a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma with all this COVID-19 going on, this coronavirus in Tulsa, in Oklahoma? And he told you to go to Tulsa and be at a rally, and then he had you signing waivers saying, I'm not responsible if you get coronavirus. He doesn't care about your ass. He cares about himself. He uses you as a prop. And if you love that kind of thing, and you're into all of that kind of thing, that submissiveness, if that turns you on, then that's what you do. But this is Nemo the time. He's going to turn around and he's going to kick you under the bus too. Believe me. He does it to everybody in the administration that he supposedly runs. Come on now. He doesn't care about anybody in his administration. He cares about himself. Telling Ghislaine Maxwell, I wish you well. No, when he's really saying to Ghislaine Maxwell is, you better not give me up. Come on, folks. You can see this. I think at this stage, some people just don't want to see it because it's too terrifying for them. It's too frightening for them. John Heilman, again, is correct. And he's been saying, and he said what I've been saying here and what others have. I'm not the only one. I don't want to make myself to this club of one here. There are many people who have been talking about this for years, much less now, with this fascism and this authoritarianism and this tyranny. Even these so-called founding fathers wrote articles in the Constitution to try to safeguard against this stuff. And over the last 20 years, we have absolutely descended into the naked operation of fascism, even though fascism has always been here, quite frankly. You don't think what happened in the 1960s to black people was fascism? You don't think so? Come on. And even way before that, by the way. If it's taken this long to wake you up and to be woken up this long, if it's taken this long for you to wake up, congratulations, you're here. Now, come on, folks. Now, let's do something about this. Let's get active. Let's get out there and vote. Please. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.